Hey guys, welcome back. So today we want to pick on the M16 just a little bit. We previously did a video talking about whether or not the AK was becoming obsolete. And we, kind of kicked the AK community a little bit there, make them think a little bit. And that's what the whole point of the exercise was. And now we're going to do the same thing with the AR-15 M16 because the U.S. military has recently adopted the M5 rifle. They're rolling it out. The M16's not out of inventory just yet and won't be for quite some time. But the military, U.S. military anyway, is moving towards this new M5 rifle and the 6.8 by 51 millimeter cartridge. Joining us today is Jason, the cameraman, once again.
Hey guys.
He is probably one of the biggest AR guys I know in my circle of friends. He works on them all the time, constantly tuning them, updating them, changing them. And it's pretty fun to see what he comes up with, which is some pretty cool stuff. So with all that being said, all right, so the U.S. military is moving away from the M16, at least in the long term, right? So it's going to be a little while before they get enough M5s in service and people trained up and armors trained up. It's a process. It's not like this flip a switch.
At least on paper, it looks to be done, right?
Well, the agreement's been signed. They've officially adopted a new military service rifle, but it may take a little while to roll this thing out.
Oh, yeah.
But the end goal is to replace the M16 as America's service rifle. It's had a long career. I mean, the gun's been in service over 60 years. This is America's longest serving military rifle, which is really interesting to think about. My entire life, I was born when the M16 was in service, and I have lived my entire life knowing that is our service rifle, as most Americans have known that. If they were born mid-60s or so, going back that far, that the M16 is all they've ever known.
Right.
And so really, really interesting times. I didn't think the U.S. military was going to do it. They've done this so many times where they've spun up the community and got everybody excited about the XM8 or whatever it was, that iteration. And this is it. This is a new rifle. This is what we're going to adopt. And then, nope, never mind. Yeah, 3 years into a 6-year development contract, they quit.
Yeah, fizzles and dies. And then next thing you know, well, we're fine with what we got. And that is what I believe is going to happen. You see, I was talking about this. Either they're tired of that happening, right? They're like, I swear to God, we keep doing this and we just let it fizzle. Just do it. Just sign the paper. Just do it. You know what I mean? Like some super high up or whatever is like, just take it, whatever. Take all the M4s, M16s, chuck them in a bin, get this rifle. I don't care. You know what?
We've talked about this. And I think you might be onto something because it seems kind of weird when they have adopted a new service rifle, right? This rifle clearly is a result of our experiences in Iraq and Afghanistan. We end the wars overseas, and a year later, not even a year later, we're looking at a new rifle. A little over a year later, we've adopted a new rifle. It seems like, well, we had this massive budget allocated for the wars. We got to keep that because if you don't spend it, you lose it.
Yep.
We got to spend that money somewhere. So let's go buy a new rifle. Now's the time because we got an excess budget because the war's over. I think there's a little bit of that going on here. And for the life of me, I can't figure out why we went from 5.56, which I would agree is not the best cartridge in the world.
I would agree as well.
I think it's, and it's so weird to see the media latch onto the 5.56, the AR-15 talking about how devastating it is. It's like, folks, that's a varmint cartridge. Devastating is 8mm Mauser, 30-06, 308. The old battle rifle cartridges. That thing is a varminting cartridge, literally designed to kill small varmints. Yes, anything moving 3,000 feet per second can kill anything, but it's not the ideal cartridge for fighting at distance. It just isn't.
You poke holes in things that aren't meant to have holes.
Right. A 22 long rifle will poke a hole. Well, according to Joe Biden, it'll go in and it'll just make a little hole. They can dig that out and you'll survive that. But the 9mm will suck your lung out, and apparently the 223 will as well.
Why are they dying? And they showed me a X-ray. He said a 22 caliber bullet will lodge in the lung, and we can probably get it out, may be able to get it and save the life. A 9mm bullet blows the lung out of the body.
Right out?
Right out the backside, whole lung gone. But anyway, so I digress. Yeah. So it seems really interesting that they've looked at not only a new rifle, but a new cartridge. And then we have the whole issue with NATO, right? So NATO's still adopting M16s, right? LMT, right.
Like there seems to be this more and more countries are picking up a variation of the AR-15 M16.
Yeah.
And then here, like you say, we say this all the time. It's like, hey, you might want to stop. We just made this major change. Get on board.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, our allies must love this when they woke up in the morning like, America did what? No,
Yeah.
we're serious. You're kidding. They must have thought it was a joke that we actually did this. It'll be interesting to see NATO's reaction, because a long time we weren't synced with NATO across the board, right? We were still using 45 ACP when NATO was using 9mm. We were using 223 when they were still using 308 and fighting rifles, you know. So there's been this disconnect for most of our relationship with NATO, and here we go again. But what's really interesting to me is the M16 has some design, I won't call them shortages, but interesting design quirks, right? For example, the extension tube, the buffer assembly. Most people would agree if they could get rid of that, that's one thing that they would change about the M16, right? Because if you get rid of that buffer tube, you can shorten the overall length of the rifle. You can put a folding stock on it. You can put all sorts of accessories back there, different types of stocks, whatever. It seems to be one of the limiting factors to the overall design in terms of it being able to progress forward into the future. Not a big problem, but one of those things people would change.
Some would argue, though, that the AR-15, that Law Tactical had fixed the buffer tube issue, if you will. They were able to make a device that attached to the receiver that would allow you to fold the AR-15 buffer tube out of the way. And we have to remind folks that even though they say it can fire with the stock folded to the side, that's not ideal. That's not what it's made for. It's made for storage, made for compactness, backpacking, whatever it is. Most folks, as you know, when you fire a rifle, you deploy the butt stock and then fire the rifle. So the AR-15, they kind of looked at that, and one company came up with a solution that's been pretty durable. A lot of folks have been using those Law Tacticals now for quite some time. So,
yeah, I mean, that's one way to get around it, but people inevitably ask whenever we show a new rifle with a folding stock, does it work with the stock folded? And we try to remind people, as you just did, that the stock isn't in military fighting weapons. The stock is only folded for storage, right? But so, yeah, there have been solutions to pretty much everything that people have complained about with the M16 over the years. They don't like the internal piston system, otherwise known as direct gas impingement. We've done gas piston guns. There was a time, and we just recently were talking about this when we saw that Stag. There was a time where every company was racing to make a piston gun.
yeah.
And everybody wanted a piston AR because the M16 poops where it eats and blah, 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 blah. And over time, people started to realize that, we'll just call it direct DI because it's a mouthful of words to say internal piston system. But the DI system really wasn't as bad as people made it out to be, right? It actually is an ingenious system. The gun was designed around it. And just about 99% of the piston AR-15s that we fired are more punchy, have more noticeable recoil impulse than the DI guns. The DI guns are just very mild.
Yeah, it's a smoother recoil impulse out of the DI guns, where you get that really sharp, at first, recoil jolt, if you will, out of the piston guns, just because of that. You know, you got the piston tapping the carrier violently, and then that's just causing it to just, fly backwards. That's where you get the carrier tilt and all that stuff,
yeah.
and they're always trying to combat this, that, and the other with piston guns. But how many DI guns? I mean, we have shot
8,000 rounds.
Right, and we keep going, and we need to keep going on that thing, get that puppy up to 10. But, I do find it interesting, though, that, yeah, there's always somebody trying to find a solution to make the AR-15 better or modernize it. And I think we've reached that peak.
Yeah.
I don't think there's really anything more you can do to the AR-15 M16 that will make it any better. You've got people staking the gas key this way, or staking the castle nut this way, or adding more material to the upper receiver, or adding this, little changing from a roll pin to an HD coil pin, or whatever it is. There's always something, a double dimple, or pinning, or double dimple pinning and screwing the, you know what I mean? There's,
putting a roller cam pin in and
right.
versus
So
square.
There's so many things that you can choose from on the AR-15. I think we've reached the peak. It's there.
Yeah. There's no major new developments around the corner for the M16 in terms of modernizing it or changing it in any meaningful way. So it's kind of reached its evolutionary apex, right? It's reached apogee. Now it's just kind of a downhill slide from here. And I think if the U.S. military were to keep the M16 in service, it would be one of those things where they want to get rid of it. They're just kind of holding on to it because they don't want to spend the money and go through the whole rigmarole of actually adopting a new rifle. But then you get into the whole question of, I think it's interesting that they chose new caliber to go, or cartridge to go with the new rifle. That makes even more sense to me. Right. Had they adopted the MCX and 5.56, that would have made less sense to me, because why adopt an entirely new weapon system to launch the exact same projectile?
Right.
There's no gain there. And that's the conclusion the military came to every single time they tried to find an alternative to the M16 chambered in 5.56. They came back and said, even the 75th Rangers with their SCAR 16s, they said, yeah, after fielding them for a while, there's really no gain to using them. We're just going to go back to the M4.
Right.
So it just seems like it was time, and the time was also maybe for a new cartridge. But I still question the logic of adopting the 6.8 by 51 because we've gone back to a battle rifle cartridge. We used to call it big bore battle rifles, 308, 30-06, 8mm Mauser.
Very potent cartridge.
We've gone back to an incredibly potent cartridge that has an incredible operating pressure that can accelerate a bullet in 13-inch barrels to 3,000 feet per second. A truly achievement in terms of ballistics for any cartridge, military or otherwise. I mean, I can see great application for that technology in just hunting rifles and extending the range of extended long-range target shooters that like to shoot past a mile and stuff like that. There's just so much that's interesting about that new 6.8. But as a military cartridge, we're going to go right back, because they have the giggle switch on it. The M5 has the full auto capability. Going to go right back to the M14 days where the gun's just going to be all over the place on full auto for most of the troops. It's really hard to train people that have never fired guns before to control a machine gun, especially a machine gun that has a cartridge like the 6.8 by 51. So now I've seen the insides thanks to, Ian over at Forgotten Weapons. I've seen the inside of the rifle. I see how it works. There's nothing new in the M5, right? It truly is just like the Virtus in terms of being a short stroke gas piston, internal spring system, so you have a folding stock. I mean, it's just an upsized Virtus with some tweaks to it, but there's nothing that's going to mitigate recoil in there. And it's also interesting that when you take a look at how the U.S. Army plans to deploy it, they plan to deploy it with suppressors in all the weapons, including the new cruiser. Well, I guess they're calling it a SAW, a squad automatic weapon, or a light machine gun. It looks like a heavy machine gun or MG, or yeah, you know what I'm trying to say.
Right.
Like the M60, light machine gun.
LMG. Yeah.
Right. But it's not. It's meant to replace the SAW because it's a lightweight machine gun that's firing this much more potent cartridge. That thing definitely I see having application, and it's surprisingly lightweight. But the M5 and that new cartridge, I don't know. And is it better than the M16? And should they have maybe looked at something else? I mean, we've talked about this in previous videos, so I don't want to go down that rabbit hole too much. Like maybe bumping up the pressure on the 6.8 SPC versus going full-size rifle cartridge?
Yeah, true intermediate. I kind of want to go back to when we were first talking about the M5, I know I was kind of sticking on the full auto. And then I got to thinking, right? Even in my service, right? I was regular Army, regular infantry. Now, our firearms had semi and 3-round burst. Our M4s were not auto. They just had 3-round burst on them. I can't recall of one time other than when I was just having fun on the range, ever turning that selector to that third position. Ever. It was always safe semi. That was it. So maybe with the M5, auto's not necessarily going to be that big of a deal because most armies, training or whatever, if you will, aren't using that. To lay down the fire, they're always using the SAW of some kind and then advancing and, aimed precision fire, aimed fire, whatever it may be. So maybe the auto part's not going to be honestly, that big of a deal. Maybe.
Right.
The other part that I'm looking at is just the cartridge itself, the evolution of it. I think what they have done with that bimetal or multi-part cartridge is potentially the future of cartridges, to be able to get that pressure high and be able to get that bullet up to the speed that it can in the shorter barrel. I could see that technology moving into things like, and I'll just throw cartridge calibers out there, 6mm Creedmoor, 22-250, or whatever it is, because like 6.5 PRC, to get, and even 300 PRC, to get the velocities that those things are getting at, you have to have like a 26-inch barrel. Right. Add a suppressor to that, and you have got this giant musket
that comes to my shoulder height. I'm 6'4".
That's so long that you're trying to track through the woods with this thing, potentially hunting or whatever it may be. Now looking at that cartridge and putting that in other calibers potentially to run that same thing, that 6.5 PRC we'll call it something different with that multi-part cartridge, shrinking that thing down to a 16 or 18-inch barrel with a suppressor, you have a more compact firearm.
Yeah.
So I think that's the future of cartridge development for sure on that. As far as the M5, I don't know, we'll see. I do believe, though, that this will probably won't even come. They'll probably get a few units or something, and then that's good. That's good. We'll just give that to our special operator guys and stuff like that. We'll just stick with the M4. You know what I mean? Or whatever it is. So we'll see what happens. But like you said, the military-industrial complex is what it is. And like you said, they had this huge budget.
Yeah.
They pulled out of the wars, and they still got that huge budget. And like you said, you got to burn it to keep it type of thing. And so maybe that is what took place. But
so this being said, so let's assume that the world's militaries over the next 20, 30 years are going to go to something like the 6.8. And another thing I wanted to bring up, which I thought was interesting, I haven't seen the ballistics on the true velocity alternative, but I've read that it offered comparable ballistics and they were using a polymer case. Now, to me, that seems to make more sense because with my limited understanding of manufacturing, and I've toured a number of manufacturing facilities, it would be much easier to manufacture that polymer case than manufacturing a brass steel case with a washer and all the other stuff that goes along with it. Mm-hmm. Maybe not. I just would think the polymer option would be more cost effective because keep in mind, we're going to be dumping these rounds, leaving these cases laying on the ground like we always do. And there's an awful lot of effort that goes into making those brass multi-part case cartridges for the 6.8. But not that the true velocity is super simple to make because it does have to have something substantial in the head of the case like steel as well. Mm-hmm. It just seems the polymer would be a cheaper option.
Yeah, it could
because
be.
I've seen
I
what
love to see
extruding brass
things,
tape
you know
requires. Yeah. So that being said, I still think that the M16 is probably seeing its final days.
I agree.
If the M5 really takes off. Now, you brought up something interesting I think is a possibility. I don't know if the Army's going to completely do a 180 and go, yeah, you know what, we were mistaken. We're just going to use these in spec ops. I think they're more likely to go, okay, so that 80,000 or 100,000 PSI cartridge for defeating body armor or whatever task they've developed it for, and the recoil that goes along with it. All right, let's just do a brass-cased version of it that's lower pressure at 60, 65,000 PSI, and that's what we're going to train with. That's what we're going to primarily issue to the troops. Unless we go into a combat environment, then they're going to get the full power cartridge.
Maybe.
Right? Because it has that option of doing that, right? It has the ability to go back to old technology, run at lower pressures, run with pure brass, and, you know, for training and things like that, they don't have to use the good gas. They can use, you know, the cheap stuff.
True.
Potentially.
That's
right?
actually a good point that you just made right there. I mean, that very well could be it. They could be training and working with lower pressure rounds that are much more cost effective, but the actual round that they would use for any type of fighting is setting off to the side. You know what I mean? And then when they need it, they can switch to it type of thing. So that's a good point.
Like the old days of 357 Magnums when police carried them, right? You had the 357 Magnum duty load, but you would oftentimes practice with 38 Special. Less recoil, less noise, and cost effective to do that, right? So, yeah, I think that might be the case. But, you know, the M16, the question then becomes, could we have done the SR25, say, in the new cartridge? Knights, I read somewhere, maybe it was on Task and Purposes blog, but Knights had made a statement. It turns out that they did, in the very early stages, according to this article I read, the SCAR was considered, but then it was quickly kicked from consideration. The military wanted nothing to do with it for whatever reason. And then Knights said that they weren't going, I don't think they were going to submit a gun based on the SR25 chambering 6.8x51, but they did say it was possible. Right. And that makes sense. I mean, there's nothing, again, special about the M5. There's nothing in there to make it outside of the barrel. There's nothing really unique about it that makes it capable of handling those higher pressures. It's just making the barrel thicker to handle those higher pressures, right?
Right. Well, you'd be in an AR-10 sized rifle at that point.
We know what an SR-25 weighs now. Mm-hmm. Put a heavier barrel on it, it's going to be a chunk.
These things are going to be chunks. I mean, the Virtus is already a pretty chunky 5.56. This thing's going to be
I think it was, what were they saying, 7.7 pounds? Something like that?
Out of this M5.
On the M5. So, you know, the M16's gotten up there in the weight department. But keep in mind, that's empty. That's before they put that really fancy Vortec laser range finding ballistic calculator optic on there that probably costs more than the rifle.
Optics, lights, lasers.
Right. The thing's going to be pretty hefty. Mm-hmm. Even though, you know, empty, it's not significantly more heavy than the M16, but when you consider the combat load, with all the magazines, ammunition, the gun itself, optics, and other things that would be used to go along with it, it is going to be a heavier combat load.
All right.
So I just wonder if that's the future, though, because it seems like the U.S. military finally realized their mistake early on in adopting the 223 5.56, that was going too far, because there was even a time when they're considering going to 17 caliber. I remember HK working on guns in 17. Yeah. I mean, they were going lighter and faster, smaller and faster for a while because they wanted to do 3-round bursts so fast that all 3 rounds at 100 yards would hit the target. So basically, the G11 is a perfect example of that, right? The old prototype
Right.
HK.
I remember that thing, yep.
Looked like a Swiss watch on the inside. That thing recoiled backwards and got off 3 rounds before the recoil impulse was transferred to the shooter and disrupting the muzzle. So they were trying that, but they never went anywhere with super small calibers. So we kind of stuck with 5.56. But now it seems that we've gone to the other extreme and went right back to M14. Right. Big bulky rifle, heavy combat load, and considerably more recoil. So is that the future? I don't know.
I think it is. I do believe that the M16 has met its days. I do. I think the thing is, it continues to serve, and it will continue to serve all across, the world, if you will. The rifle's far from dead, just like the AK.
There's millions of them.
I mean, I rip on it, some modification required and whatnot, but it is still a very, a rifle that can get business done. You know what I mean?
It's more of a third world rifle now,
Right.
because of the volume of the guns that have been dumped into conflict zones, which is the same thing going to happen to the M16s. We're going to give them away as foreign aid.
Oh, yeah.
Once we transfer over to the new gun, we'll keep a number of them in storage like we did the M14s, just in case. Mm-hmm. But a lot of them, because there's going to be plenty of excess, are just going to get dumped as foreign aid, and they're going to wind up in all the hot spots of the globe,
right?
Fighting in third world conflicts.
But I do believe that they have been wanting to move forward on some kind of new rifle for years. And I think finally they're just like, just do it. Yeah. Just do it.
Now's the time.
Yep. Just get it done. Let's get a new something going, and we'll work out the kinks as we go.
So where does this leave our allies that just literally recently adopted M16 type rifles, right? France ditched their bullpup, the FAMAS, and they went to the HK416. We have the LMT rifles that we've talked about lately. New Zealand and Estonia going to LMT M16 variants. So there are countries out there still adopting a 60-year-old design. It's been updated, right? Especially in the case of the LMTs. Some are gas piston, some are DI, but they've evolved to that pinnacle like we talked about earlier. There's really not much more you can do to improve them. We have ambient fire controls on them now, and bolt hold, bolt releases, and magazines releases on both sides. I mean, pretty much everything you could ask for in a modern firearm. With the exception of the 6.8x51. So where does that leave our NATO allies? And are we really, like, if we got into a war tomorrow, will we continue the rollout of the M5, or will we stop that whole thing and go back to the M4? It just seems weird. I mean, even the Marines just adopted the IAR, right? They wanted it as a light machine gun, but I think that was just a ploy to get it because they just wanted the HK, and now it's their infantry rifle. But now the Marines are even talking about the M5.
Well, I mean, if our military adopts this thing, truly adopts it, and it starts rolling out, I don't think they'll stop the rolling out. I think they'll continue to go, because logistics is really what matters in all of this stuff, right?
And we can't have the branches using different weapons and different cartridges.
Exactly. So I think what will end up happening is, while we have our NATO allies still using 5.56, I'm sure the United States will probably have the trailer with some 5.56, stuffed in the back somewhere for them or something with logistics. I think that maybe the thinking in the U.S. is, we handle all of our own logistics anyway, and whenever we do get into a conflict with anything, we handle it anyway, so we'll be fine.
Right. We don't need NATO necessarily.
Exactly. We don't need you guys to adopt this cartridge because we'll handle it anyway, type of thing. Maybe that's their thinking. Maybe they think they've got the logistics nailed down for the United States, for that matter, but they'll have 5.56 ammunition should they need it, or whatever it is, to assist. I don't know.
Yeah.
Or adopt or, turn on your money printers. Come on.
Sorry about that. About the new Estonian rifle.
Yeah.
We're going to ditch that. It's in service for less than a year. We're going to go ahead and adopt the M5. But Sig can't come out. I mean, it's going to take a long time for Sig to meet the military obligations.
They're going to have to
because we do have to push it across all branches. There's no way. People in the comments of one of our previous videos were saying, "Oh, there's no way the Marines are going to adopt that thing." Nonsense. It's going to be forced upon them because we're not going to keep 2 service rifles in inventory and 2 cartridges in inventory. We're just not.
No, they won't.
So it'll be pushed out to the Coast Guard, the Navy, Air Force, Marines, everybody.
Everybody. If this is what they're doing, everybody's going to get it
Eventually. Yeah.
And so, I don't know. I think that's just the way that's going to end up going. That's my theory.
So the M16 is seeing its final days, man. It's on the downside.
This could be it.
Of a long, illustrious career. It's sliding towards becoming a historical marker in a book. You know, it's really weird to see because it's something like, again, I've known it my entire life. I love the rifle. Never been a huge fan of the cartridge, but you know, I've loved the rifle. It was such an ingenious design for when it was adopted. It was truly a space age to a kid. Mm-hmm. You know, growing up in the 80s, looking at that thing going, wow, man, that was just it's so cool. I had to have one. And, you know, it is America's rifle. I mean, people watching this, almost everybody watching this probably has one.
Oh, yeah.
And it's, even though the U.S. military is going to adopt the M5, it's going to be some time before those things become affordable and commonly available to where the U.S. citizen is going to move away from 5.56. I think it's going to take the U.S. commercial market to move away from it longer. It's going to take it longer to move away from 5.56 in the military.
Market is going to be...
Because the AR-15 is entrenched.
Right. Because I know for a fact, as far as I'm going, it's not dead to me. The AR-15 is most certainly not dead to me.
I'll shoot it till the day I die.
I am... You know, constantly, you see me all the time, creating 11.5, 12.5, 13-inch, 350 Legend, 450 Bushmaster, 300 Blackout, 6.8 SPC. I'm always messing with different cartridges, barrel lengths, and all this other stuff, tuning, gassing, whatever it is. I'll break out the kit, and I'll have the 450 Bushmaster for blasting through that cinder block, change my upper for whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'm always messing around with the AR-15, and I love it to death. Would I personally switch to an M5 if given... Be like, here, you know, give us 10 grand or whatever it is. Here's your M5 and, you know, a case of ammo. I'd be like, no.
Not for 10 grand.
You know,
It'd have to be competitive with the M16 and the AR-15.
There's no way.
In terms of pricing.
The Virtus right now is what?
Well, in a normal market.
22 on a normal market. I want to say MSRP is like 22 on those things or something like that. This thing's got to be at least 35, I would imagine. At a minimum, without the can. Yeah, without the can, maybe even 39 to 4.
Yeah, I think you're getting up into HK territory, really, in terms of pricing, like MR762 pricing. I really do. Yeah, I think you're getting up closer to 4,000 probably. So that's being generous.
And you see that next to a rack of quality AR-15s or AR-10s, the average person is going to go, I'll take
$1,000, $1,500.
I'll take that $1,500 one right there. Right. You know, so.
And in most cases, the 5.56 is plenty for what most people are going to use it for. Yeah. I mean, I live out in wide open spaces. I do like the idea of 6.8 SPC. I do like the idea of 308. I do like the idea of 6.5 Creedmoor. I would like the idea of 6.8 by 51 because of where I'm at. It would make sense to be able to take longer shots. But 10 grand is ridiculous. It's just that's so far out there that most people, including us, it's way out of our price range.
I desperately want to try the cartridge. I like a Sig Cross or something. So
me too.
We can actually shoot this thing and see what it does in the wind, on steel, its drop, its velocity, its how it packs a punch on those targets. I so want to see this.
I want to see what if it just starts tearing up the targets. I mean, that'd be interesting to see if it's going to tear up AR-500 steel or not. Yeah. Well, I think it's got a lot of promise. The new weapon system. Again, I want our troops to have the absolute best technology-wise. And so I'm not going to poo-poo anything until I have a chance to actually use it, learn something about it. It's awful easy to sit here and quarterback it with having no experience, right? Armchair quarterback it. But yeah, I think that as much as I love the M16, I am ready for a change. I really am. That's the reason I use the Virtus more often than not. I am ready for a change. But yeah, you'll never get that A2 out of my hands. You'll never get the 6.8 SPCs out of my hand. They're just too much fun to shoot, and the ammunition is too available.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, that's exactly it. It's just like all these new cartridges coming out. People poo-poo all over 300 PRC, 6.5 PRC, 6mm Creedmoor, all this other stuff. They're like, well, why don't you just get a 243? Why don't you just get a 270? Why don't you just get a 300 Win Mag? It's like, well, that's great. I mean, that's 1950s, 60s technology, but here we are, 2022. We've removed the belt from the cartridge. We're getting heavier bullets that we can push out of these cartridges with more powder charges behind them. They're modernizing the cartridge for better efficiency.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Same goes with this AR-15 M16. there has to be a change made to the weapon system to our U.S. military, and I think that's what's happening here. I think they're just doing it.
Yeah.
And they're gonna make the changes as they come across them. You know what I mean? So
and thinking about it today, man, I think it makes sense. It makes enough sense that I really want to see how this rollout goes, because yes, the M16 probably has reached its expiration date. I mean, it's time to move on. And all we were waiting for was either laser beams or a better propellant. Well, it turns out we're using the same propellant, but now at much higher pressures. Who knows? Maybe they're using handgun powder in it. I have no idea how they're achieving those pressures. But it's going to be interesting to see what this is capable of, because there is something that's changed. The rifle itself, not so much. The cartridge is innovative.
I would have wanted it.
Yeah, I mean,
in my deployment time, I would have wanted this rifle.
I think any experienced rifleman would want it.
Yeah.
Right? That's why I'm interested in it. And would I be interested in an AR-10 that chambers it? Yeah, but less so than an M5, right?
Well, it's got a military collector in you.
Well, yeah, it is. But again, see, I'm moving away from the M16 myself and the AR-15. So if given a choice today, I would be more interested in the M5 if I were in the military today than I would be in the M16 M4.
Yeah.
And as a civilian, the AR-15 makes more sense to me, going back to my childhood. But as an adult, and the M5 and the 6.8 coming on the scene, now you're starting to pull me away. The 6.8 SPC started to pull me away from it. But still, that cartridge was developed to work in conjunction with the M16. Now we have a cartridge that was developed to work in an entirely a different weapon system. And that to me is very, very interesting. And so
very modular.
I do want to see how this plays out. I do think it's going to give our troops a bump, and I do think it's time for the M16 to be retired. It's sad to see it go, but it's a really hard thing, because there's such an emotional attachment to it being an American.
And there always will be.
Yeah.
It'll never die.
It's just an iconic thing that served us well through many, many conflicts.
That's right.
Globally. So, all right, guys, we look forward to your comments down below. What do you think about the M16? Do you think it's time for it to go? Or do you think the military or the Army jumped the gun and adopted something that is going to be, I don't know, less effective? I'm looking forward to those comments. Guys, if you'd like to support us here at the Military Arms Channel, the best way to do that is to become part of our Patreon family. There is a link in the video description below. Click that link and check us out over on Patreon. Also, right here underneath your video player you're watching right now, you got a little join button. Click that join button, and you can support us here in the age of demonetization on YouTube. And last but not least, guys, please swing by and check out coppercustom.com. Thank you for 14 years of support, and we'll talk to you guys soon.